It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
It's now time to actually get some action and do something about it. And here to share some thoughts on why this is imperative and maybe how we get to go about it. I've asked David Pepper to come talk with us. David is the former head of the Ohio Democratic Party. He's also the author of Laboratories of Autocracy, a wake-up call from behind the lines. David, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me.
So you got your state senator saying, hey, we got to end this filibuster thing. We got to get something done on voting rights. We've got to take back some of the control because guess what? 2022 is just around the corner.
Yeah. And he, Ohio, myself and him and others, we've seen it up close. What they're doing to these states. I mean, we're basically, crying out to these senators. A lot of these states no longer really resemble functioning democracies, whether it's gerrymandered congressional seats, gerrymandered state house and state senate seats, other ways of voter suppression, like purging the voters for infrequent voting. I mean, it really is out of control. It's at this point, just to make it clear how bad it is, you essentially have a group of people in these state houses in Ohio and elsewhere who themselves have never really been in real elections. They haven't really been in democracy. All they've known is a set of rigged elections. So, they're basically doing all they've known. And that's why it's the federal government, which literally has a duty in the Constitution to make sure that all states are democracies. And I'm glad Sherrod Brown is calling upon that. Others are. It's late in the game. It sounds dramatic unless you know the stakes. They really should not go home for recess until this is done.
No, I agree.
You start getting into 22, as you know, the election cycle starts. It's already started. It's too late, and they've got to show this is as serious as those of us living through it know that it's serious.
Right, but we've been talking about this for a long time. And, the other time when there was a chance to do something about it was during the Obama years. And Obama just said, well, if they're going to do that, we have to go get more votes. Well, there's a point at which you can't make up for the number of votes that they're blocking. You just can't do it.
You can't. I mean, we're a great case study. It's not even right to ask these voters. We're talking about brutal voter suppression. So if they are purging hundreds of thousands of voters from the rolls, to then say to your volunteers, go re-register those voters, battle government suppression with volunteer efforts, it's not a fair fight. And at a certain point, and this is part of what happened to Hillary Clinton in 2016, she spent so much of her time re-registering purge voters. We all know she didn't get enough time with swing voters all over states like Ohio. So once you start forcing campaigns to make up for absolute suppression by government, it's a losing proposition. Every once in a while it may work, but it's not the right thing to ask folks to do. And it's in the end, you won't ever make up the gap for brutal gerrymandering that rigs elections and the suppression of hundreds of thousands or millions of voters. You're just not going to be able to do that on a voluntary basis.
Now, what do you say to the person, David, who goes, but I've got conservative friends who they look at the ballot box and they complain that Democrats are stealing it, they're stuffing it, they've got illegals, they've got all of these fanciful ideas of things that Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell and the pillow guy and all the whole cavalcade of crazy kept spewing to them. They truly believe that the game's rigged. So the justification is, well, we're just doing what the game allows.
Yeah, at some point, you try and battle facts with facts, but at this point, you simply get it done in the Senate. We have 50 senators, we have a majority of the House, we have a president. We have to get it done in this window. And so even if, hopefully some Republicans understand it, others won't, at some point, you just got to go make it happen. And when you have the majorities, which we do, you have to do it. So the key conversation is actually in this case with Joe Manchin and other senators, and he's not the only one, let's be clear,
right,
who are not taking the position Sherrod Brown is, and they're hung up on getting a filibuster. Now, we could debate the filibuster all day on a lot of topics, But I sincerely believe that if you read the Constitution and you understand that in states across the country, Republicans are attacking democracy and voting rights by passing laws without ever getting one Democratic vote. So that they don't say they need to get at the state level Democrat buy-in. Well, why should we require getting Republican buy-in at the federal level to protect against these attacks at the state level that don't get Democratic buy-in? It's asymmetric warfare, and you lose it. And we don't need to convince, Rob Portman of this. We simply need to convince 50 Democrats and continue to do what the House already did and just get it done. And then we can spend all next year, pushing what we've done on infrastructure, talking about Build Back Better if it passes. This is not necessarily something you run on, but you got to get it done to give, candidates and voters a fair chance to participate in democracy, which in too many states right now, they just don't have.
Yeah, no, I've had conversations about your state of Ohio and mine of Pennsylvania as well. Where I live in Pennsylvania, there was the one election year where, Democrats got 500,000 more votes, but only won 5 of the 18 congressional seats because it is so badly gerrymandered. And Ohio, kind of the same thing, only the difference is in Pennsylvania, Democrats usually win statewide offices while Republicans usually win them in Ohio. So what I get from people is going, well, Ohio's a solid red state. And I'm going, not so much. It's kind of a gerrymandered state. And the reason I think they win those statewide races is because a lot of people have gone, what's the point of me voting in a 65-35 district?
Right. Well, there are a couple of things going on. Our general breakdown is somewhere Republicans vote in these congressional races statewide for Republicans in about the low to mid 50s. Democrats, even in these terribly gerrymandered districts, added up around Ohio, we're getting about 45 or 46. A fair map would mean out of 15 districts, we have, 7 in a good year, 6 in a not so good year. The map they're proposing is literally 13-2 or 12-3. It's outrageous. The last decade, even in an Obama blue year, even in a year where Cher had won by 8, the map was always the same outcome: 12 Republicans, 4 Democrats. It's total, and none of them were even close. It's totally rigged. So of course, Democrats aren't walking in and saying, we deserve 13 out of 15 seats or 12 out of 15. But us trying to get, let's say Democrats pushed a map that was somehow 11 Democrats and 4 Republicans. That's as out of whack with how Ohio voters are voting as the current Republican proposed map. So they're going way beyond what would be normal, anywhere close to fair. And you add it all up in Ohio and Pennsylvania, other states, that way you guarantee the entire Congress for a decade.
Right.
And at some point, this looks more like how Russia runs democracy Putin runs democracy in Russia and Orban in Hungary than it does America. And at some point, we've got to wake up to that problem. And here's the good news: the bills that passed the House and that is now in front of the Senate correct for this and many other problems if they simply pass it.
No, it's something we absolutely have to do. But in talking about what you were just saying there, you look at the numbers and it explains why nothing that we the people want actually gets done. When you're not afraid of the voting populace because the game is already rigged, you're not really that responsive to the needs of the people. And we had talked not too long ago about a representative in your state who, when a constituent called and said, hey, how come we can't do something about this town that is basically, abandoned? And the guy said, move. I don't know in what functional democracy a representative tells their constituent, hey, if you don't like it, move. I don't get it.
Yeah. And this is a really important point. If this is what I would say to the hypothetical Republican friend you mentioned, that even though we don't have to convince them to pass the current bill, the current state of democracy and the lack of choice in elections is crushing not just blue parts of these states, but red parts of these states. These towns that we're talking about, the ones that are like the rural county seat or smaller, they desperately need infrastructure. The infrastructure is popular in these places because they have the streets that have never been paved in years. or other problems. Their main streets are dying, yet their state reps and especially their Congress people are voting against those things, not just once, but for years. And they're voting for a trickle-down economy approach that never helps lift these towns. And they do it for the reason you mentioned. They're never going to lose. So the public outcomes, as bad as they are in these small towns and these rural areas, they don't cost these people anything. The Congress people. So the decline in rural Ohio and small town Ohio is directly related to the fact that there's no democracy in these places. And so it's not just a blue-red thing. When it comes to how so much is falling apart that we used to think was strong, this sort of small, mid-sized town pride that was the core of places like Pennsylvania and Ohio, it's collapsing in large part because there's no democracy left in these places. It may feel good. They see someone of their own party winning an election, but it doesn't feel good when the towns represented by these people are falling apart and the people in office are voting against what these towns need again and again and again.
No, you're right. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're here with David Pepper. He's the former chairman of the Ohio Democratic Party, also the author of Laboratories of Autocracy, a wake-up call from behind the lines. In looking at this legislation, which some of it seems really common sense. We should allow every person to vote. That seems like common sense. It's something we used to have for a moment or two. It seems to me that there are ways that we can open it up to make voting a lot easier. I would like to see a holiday. I would like to see, on a weekend, I would like to see a lot of things done.
Yeah.
But I find interesting that a lot of my conservative friends, not so interested in changing any of that stuff. They kind of like the rigidity of that second Tuesday of the month from 7 to 7, and I don't quite know why.
Well, what's funny is I hear that often, and I normally vote on that Tuesday too, and that's fine. But most states move to early, like Ohio. We had a disaster in 2004. Everyone knew it. It was Republicans who were in charge that opened up early voting, not Democrats, after the disaster of 2004, where there was not enough capacity on election day to deal with all the voters. So they opened it up. And the truth is, a lot of people found it to be convenient, both Republicans and Democrats. And now we've got this. Here's an example where I agree with you to some degree. But polling shows us that the thing the number of states started doing a couple of years ago, where you can drop that ballot in a drop box, where you don't have to pay a postage stamp, as opposed to putting it in the mail, has turned out to be incredibly popular. Voting numbers go higher. In Ohio, 80% of voters polled said they would love to have more drop boxes. And in rural Ohio, they don't want to drive an hour each way on a small rural highway to deliver that vote to a drop box. So there's also support there. But in the end, because it does help in cities, they aren't doing it. So in some cases, when you actually break it down to what the specific thing is, voting early, because maybe you'll get called away that last weekend and you don't end up being able to vote, voting by a drop box. These are things that when you ask about them individually are actually very popular. But the people in these state houses, believing some of the hype or wanting to make voting harder, simply can't find it within themselves to make it so that more and more people vote. But we know these different mechanisms. Washington State, Oregon, much higher levels of voting, no fraud. Why? Because they've made it more convenient. Right. And by the way, until the last couple of years, a lot of these measures weren't even partisan or controversial. Georgia was the state with the Republicans in charge of everything that had drop boxes all over the place. No one even said a word about it until the pandemic. Now they're trying to get rid of them. But these things were never controversial. There was never problems. They were never partisan. So this is getting back to this sort of right-wing big lie machine that is saying that all this stuff is fraudulent and there are all these people voting fraudulent. It's just not true. And so that's allowing them to cut off these ways of voting that have actually been very convenient for people.
Yeah, but it's like the old saying: you say the lie big and long enough, people are going to believe it. And I still have people who want to argue with me that here in Pennsylvania, Donald Trump won Pennsylvania because he was up by 600,000 votes on Tuesday night. And they will not get it through their head that, that's because only half of the people got to vote. They didn't count the rest of the votes for the next several days because they were in paper ballots.
Yeah, it's very common, and it's being amped up. One thing, by the way, that Pennsylvania should do in Ohio, and this goes back to a Democratic Secretary of State, they actually run all the ballots through the machines that come in early before Election Day. They don't wait. So this problem that it comes so late and for days after, they don't actually total the numbers until Election Day, but they run them through. So in Ohio, the first votes announced at 7:40, about 10 or 15 or 20 minutes after the polls close, are all the early votes that came in up until Election Day. And it's made at least that part of these crazy theories go away.
Yeah,
and we have the reverse outcome here. For an hour or two, Democrats around the country think that the Democrats way ahead in Ohio, and then the day of votes catch up. Now, no one's sitting around acting like that's some kind of conspiracy. It's just, but I will say, by getting the votes in early and running them through the machines early, we do end up cutting off a lot of this, conspiracy stuff when they come in late and things change in the late hours or the next couple of days. That's something every state could fix if they wanted to. By the way.
last question I've got for you: how do we move forward on this? How do we get? I know Pat Toomey's not going to come around magically in his final days. I know Rob Portman's probably not going to come around. How do we get this move through?
They won't touch it. I think Joe Manchin. I'll give him credit. He's clearly wants to be bipartisan. Okay, that's his thing. That's how he's been. When he realizes that the side that is suppressing the vote is not going to magically all of a sudden vote to stop that suppression, my hope is his effort of being bipartisan, he figures out it's not working, and then they come up with a way to not get rid of the filibuster entirely. Joe Manchin and other Democratic senators aren't going to do that. But in the area of lifting democracy in states, so states like Ohio actually have democracy again, they're just the filibuster. There's no legitimate basis for it to be used to stop voting rights legislation. This is something we've talked about this before. The founding fathers literally worried that corrupt state houses could undermine our entire country's democracy. And they wrote in the Constitution that all states, they said, the federal government shall guarantee they all have a democracy, basically.
Yep.
There's no reason a filibuster should ever get in the way of that.
I'm right there with you.
Folks like Joe Manchin to see that after making a good faith effort to get Republicans, which they're unfortunately not going to get.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. David, I appreciate the time. Great stuff, man. Thanks so much.
And the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.